Hey everyone, Zoe here. For today's video on Survive Mistakes, I really want to do another Lessons Learned From video. If you've never seen a Lessons Learned From video from me before, it's where I ask the question, if one piece of media was our only reference point, what survival lessons or survival skills could we learn from it? In some cases those skills are very obvious, and in some cases the skills and lessons take a bit more extrapolation on my part. And for today's Lessons Learned From, I want to look at the 2010 post-apocalyptic film, The Book of Eli. So the film was released in 2010. It was directed by the Hughes brothers, Albert and Alan. And it was based on a screenplay by Gary Whittaker. And it stars Denzel Washington as the lead character Eli in the post-apocalyptic future of roughly 2043. So I really liked this film, and apparently it was quite influential on me because way back in 2014, the backpack from the film was the first incarnation of my bug out bag. And I've got it right here. This is the Oakley panel pack. Now, by 2014, Oakley weren't selling it in the same colour as the film anymore. I could only get black or some kind of multicam. However, I got lucky a few years down the line and was able to pick up this version on eBay. Now, this is the same colour they used in the film and the same model. However, it's called gunmetal, the colour. Not gunmetal grey, not grey, just gunmetal. So if you want one of these that was used in the film, or the same type as used in the film I should say, then you want the Oakley panel pack in gunmetal. Now, while I'm talking about the props that were actually used in the film, we're quite fortunate. Before they were sold after filming into the private collector's market, a lot of them were extensively photographed. So I'm going to be showing quite a few pictures of the props they actually used in this video, because they don't get a lot of screen time in the film and it's quite a heavy filter to give it that post-apocalyptic look. But I think it's quite interesting to see that these are the items that Eli as a character would have been using in the film to facilitate his survival. And while I was actually writing the script for this, I went on eBay and was able to find some screen-used costumes from some of the major characters still for sale on the site. I think that's quite interesting. So I'm going to be going into Eli's gear more naturally as the film progresses. I'll be dipping into it rather than just giving you a complete blurb of all the gear that Eli was carrying throughout the film. So what caused the apocalypse in the Book of Eli? If we're going to learn lessons from it, what kind of scenario are we prepping for? Well, the screenwriter Gary Whittaker was actually very vague about what type of apocalypse was actually afflicting the people of the Book of Eli. It's mostly assumed by most people to be a nuclear exchange of some kind, and there's some evidence for that, judging by some craters we see in the landscape with possible bomb fall sites. But based on some dialogue, I like to think it might have been possibly a coronal mass ejection or solar flare penetrating the Earth's ozone layer.
They said that the war tore a hole in the sky. You probably heard the stories.
Yeah.
Tore a hole in the sky. Sun came down and burned everything. Everything and everybody.
So throughout the start of the film, Eli is called a loner or a walker by the inhabitants he comes across, and he's heavily implied to be walked from the east. Now, based on some of the geography we see in the film, it's suspected to take place around Sacramento in California. So I decided to do a bit of research on Google Maps, and I will have to refer to my script for this because there's no way I'm going to memorise this. But how long would it take us to walk from the east of the United States to near Sacramento? So I used Wilmington, North Carolina as my most easterly point, and according to Google Maps, that's a 2,893 mile distance, which if we were to walk it non-stop would take 946 hours. Which is the equivalent of 39 days. And that's not accounting for any problems on the road, and I don't think you can walk for 900 hours without breaks. But that's an interesting idea for how far Eli as a character has had to travel. So consider this your spoiler warning. We're going to look into the rest of the film now. Now I've done my preamble and talked about the people that made the film, your background behind it, the geography, what setting we're in. It's time to look at the lessons we can learn from the Book of Eli.
It's a flower of light in a field of darkness, and it's given me the strength to carry on.
So as the film opens, Eli is in a heavily forested area hunting what used to be a domesticated animal. In this case, a cat. He's using a human body as bait, and we can see the first look at some of his gear, and he's wearing what looks to be a 1940s Ministry of Defence British gas mask. And he uses his bow to take down the cat. So after bagging himself a cat, we see Eli walk the road. And I'm going to take the opportunity to talk about some of the clothing that Eli wears. So I've tried to approximate it as best I can for this video, but Eli's main coat is a military M51 fishtail parka, and we see on his torso he's either wearing a long sleeved jumper with a white t-shirt underneath and brown cargo trousers. And for anyone that's interested, his sunglasses are another Oakley product like his backpack. In this case it's the Oakley Inmates sunglasses. So as Eli starts cooking his cat, we actually get to see his main fire starting option throughout the film. Now, it's not very clear in the film at all. When I first saw it, I thought what he had hanging around his neck was a cross or a crucifix. That would go with the other Christian themes that are present in the film, but it's actually a fire starting option. Eli actually carries a ferro rod around his neck, very similar to the one I've got on here, along with the key to his Bible. Now, if we look at the prop they used and the concept art, we can also see a battered American cent, which I'm implying is going to be the striker for that ferro rod. So, interesting little fact there. And as Eli cuts off his cat meat to eat, we can see what his main folding knife is. Now, again, it isn't very clear actually in the film. It's barely in the film at all. But if you look at the prop, I managed to hunt down what type of knife it was. Now, I can never pronounce the name of this knife company. It's a CRKT M16 folding knife with a partially serrated blade. Here's a picture of the prop, and here's the real knife. I think that's a pretty good match. So for our next lesson, we see that Eli's using a catchment device to catch the oils and fats that drip off his cat meat. Now, he uses that to make a tradable commodity called cat oil, which is rendered animal fat or tallow. And my original idea here was going to be I would show you guys how to make cat oil of your very own. And I learned an interesting fact. I live in the UK, if you couldn't tell from my accent. And it's actually illegal for me to buy cat meat for the purpose of human consumption in the UK. Can't buy dog meat either, completely illegal. The only loophole is I'd have to get a cat as a pet and then kill it to cook it and eat it. Who's a pretty kitty? Are you a pretty kitty? Yes, you are. You're going to show people on YouTube how cute you are. Yes, you are. Which I can't do because of animal welfare laws. So my only option would be to get a cat and wait for it to die of natural causes. So if you've got a feline friend that's on its last legs and you want to watch me eat cat meat and show you how to make cat oil on YouTube, consider sending me an email. I don't care, I'll eat cat on YouTube, it's only meat and protein. For our next lesson learned from, we can see that Eli, during his downtime, is using a natural sharpening stone to maintain the edge on his large machete. Now, interestingly, it's a kukri style machete, and like anything, it was made specifically for the film. However, if you're enamoured with the Eli machete and you want to carry it on a leather sheath on your back like Eli does throughout the film, then there are now commercially available versions of it in stainless steel, high carbon steel or Damascus steel. So if you want an Eli machete, they're out there available online. And interestingly, the original concept art actually showed Eli with a more Japanese style sword similar to a katana. We also see that Eli uses his downtime to maintain his main pistol that he uses throughout the film. In this case, it's a Heckler & Koch HK-45, which has a 10-round magazine and fires .45 ACP ammo. And thanks to the Internet Firearms database, I was able to find out that the actual release of this pistol came onto the market a year before filming began, and to make it appear old and weathered, they aged it for the film, including wrapping the handle in tape. For our next lesson learned from, we can see that Eli uses wipes from KFC to maintain his personal hygiene. Now in my original script I said you should get these from any KFC, and apparently the apocalypse may have already happened because I went to 3 separate ones around me and they didn't have any whatsoever. So who knows? but I wouldn't recommend using ones from a fast food joint anyway. I was just getting these. These are pre-injection wipes, which means they're multi-purpose. They can be used for cleaning, they can be used for disinfecting, and because they're a high strength alcohol, they can also be used as a fire tinder. So after doing his blade maintenance, his gun maintenance, and his personal hygiene with the KFC wipes, Eli then starts to relax with his media player. Now I'm told this is the third generation iPod. I don't know, I've never owned an iPod. I do listen to a lot of music and audiobooks on my media player, and that's something I'll probably cover in a future video because I think it's quite an interesting tool we don't tend to use. But in this case, Eli listens to the 1972 song Let's Stay Together by Al Green. And if you're interested, earlier in the film the main theme for the Book of Eli was called Panoramic by Atticus Ross. Another lesson we can learn is that Eli is travelling west, and we can see that he doesn't use a compass, he's using the direction of the sun to influence what direction he travels in. And as Eli breaks into this wooden shack, we see that he has his shotgun in hand. And my only criticism would be that he stands there in the doorway silhouetted against the daylight sky, making him a very obvious target rather than mule kicking in the door and getting offline and using the door frame as cover. But that's a minor criticism, and considering the twist at the end of the film, I'm willing to give the film leeway on this one. And as I'm talking about Eli's shotgun, I should point out it's a Remington 870 short-barreled witness protection shotgun, and like all the firearms in the film, it was heavily aged for the production, and just like the blade, it looks like it's changed from the original concept art stage, where it was originally a double-barrel shotgun. Our next lesson, we can see when Eli puts on his scavenged shoes, we can see his legs are wrapped in either saran wrap or cellophane. And there's probably a couple of reasons for this, and the ones I can think of off the top of my head are it's an extra layer of insulation to keep him warm, or possibly it's extra padding for some ill-fitting shoes. Obviously the film points out our next survival lesson.
And the only good thing about no soap is that you can smell hijackers a mile off.
And as he dispatches them with his machete, I want to point out the fact that Denzel Washington did his own stunts in this film. He was 55 while it was being filmed, and he trained for 5 months in martial arts, and his survival lesson that he said during an interview was that stretching was a very important survival skill. I also like how Eli scavenges off the dead hijackers, netting himself a Zippo lighter. And as Eli overlooks 2 other travellers, we can see they're using a wheelbarrow to carry heavy loads. And that's an interesting survival lesson. Obviously the use of tools to carry more heavy items rather than we just do on our person. I'm actually reminded of another post-apocalyptic film and the shopping cart that appears in The Road. And as Eli goes into town, he meets the engineer, played by Tom Waits, and displays a pretty impressive firearm disarm of the shotgun he's got pointed at him. Now the battery Eli uses to charge his iPod, the script refers to it as a Fathom 900. Don't bother pausing the video to go and Google it, I've already done it for you. It's completely fictional. We can even see the prop. Now interestingly the concept art refers to it as a Motorola battery, but this was filmed in 2010. As I'm filming this for you guys now, it's 2019. And hand-cranked chargers and emergency solar chargers for cell phones and media players are a lot more common, and they're good trickle charging options. So one lesson I want to take away from this, that we don't see many people talk about, is actually including tradable commodities in our packs. Now, people will carry cash and precious metals, but we've already seen in this case that Eli is using other tradable commodities. He's got his cat oil, and he's traded KFC wipes and that Zippo lighter to get the engineer to recharge his battery, and then he goes across the street and for a refill of his canteen he trades 2 leather gloves and a shamog.
Solara!
While we're talking about Eli's gear, his canteen appears to be very similar to this one, which is a 1940s American World War II canteen. I got this for £1 from a weapon shop that was closing down. So after saying hello to the locals, Eli is introduced to Tom Carnegie, played by Gary Oldman, before kind of being locked into a cell for the night.
People like you and me, we're the future.
I'm really not interested.
Well, the people who work for me live better than any Walker ever dreamed. Ask Redridge here. Tell you what, stay the night. We'll try a little local hospitality, see how you like it.
And as we admire Eli's overnight accommodation, we can see there's actually a poster for another post-apocalyptic film in the background. In this case it's the 1975 film A Boy and His Dog. And one of the directors, Albert Hughes, actually admits that he snuck that onto the set as a bit of an Easter egg to show some inspiration that wasn't in the original screenplay. After Eli escapes from his cell somehow,
Shit. You see it the whole night.
Where is he?
I don't...
there's actually another reference to A Boy and His Dog in the film. One of the gunmen, if you look very carefully, has a very similar rifle to one used in the 1975 film. It's similar because it's the exact same prop used by the main character Vic. It's a Springfield 1903 rifle fitted in a aftermarket carbine stock. So I'll leave it to your own personal headcanon whether this character is actually a grown-up Vic from A Boy and His Dog or not. So after Eli one-shots most of the people attacking him, showing us the power of his 45 ACP handgun, before switching to his shotgun, he then gets a protege in the form of Solara, or Solera, played by Melina Kunis. Now, she is technically in the film before this point. I just haven't had an opportunity to mention her until now because she's not been linked to a survival skill or survival lesson other than don't be illiterate. But she's useful for Eli in the film because she leads him to where Carnegie's town is getting its supply of water from, a natural spring.
I guess everyone else who knew about it died.
And as Solara tells Eli the backstory of how Carnegie used the natural waters to found his town and knew about the location from his childhood, we can take another very important survival lesson: the knowledge of your local environment and the resources that it contains. And we can also see that Carnegie did have the spring guarded, but what looks to be like a lone guard, presumably taken off screen by Eli and Solara. And if you're going to have a heavily important location guarded, don't do it with one person. Do it with several people so they can cover each other's corners and give them a means of actually being able to signal for more help. In this case, a whistle. Presumably, they never saw Eli coming, but it's still an important lesson we can learn about how to guard important resources. And it's not much of a survival lesson, but it's something I want to point out because I really quite like it. I like Eli's subterfuge with his sunglasses as a means of getting Solara back into the spring and locking her in to protect her from the dangers that Eli faces when travelling on the road.
I left my glasses inside. Just take a look for me. I'll look out here.
And as we cut back to Carnegie, we can see he's been injured in a firefight with Eli, and he's really concerned about disinfection, asking his surgeon if he's washed his hands, even giving him soap to do so.
Have you washed your filthy fucking hands?
Twice. With your soap.
Because he doesn't want to get an infection in this setting, and that's a lesson we can take from the film about the real importance of wound management. Now I need to do a bit of a trigger warning for this next scene. This next scene contains a depiction of male on female rape. Although it's an attempted rape, it is 2 males on 1 female, in this case our character of Solara. If you're someone that's going to be troubled by this depiction, consider yourself warned. But although it's already turned up in the video already, especially with the cat, I now want to talk about Eli's bow. Judging from how the prop looks, it looks to be a bundle bow of some kind, either made out of wood or fiberglass, lashed together with duct tape, and it's a really useful stealth tool for both hunting and for taking out the rapists. And our next skill actually comes from Carnegie. He recognises the carrion birds as an indicator for a fresh kill, and uses that information he's read from the environment to get an idea of where Eli and Solara have gone.
Over there.
And that, combined with his knowledge of where the local spring was, possibly might tell us that in the past he's actually had some time on the road and maybe a survivalist in his own right, although the framing of the film only shows this sedentary point in his life. It's an interesting thing to consider. So as Eli and Solara bed down for the night with a campfire in the broken cooling tower, I should point out that the vast majority of lessons in the Book of Eli are front-loaded. Although I've still got things to say about the film, I'm going to really struggle for survival skills and survival lessons from this point onwards. So be warned about that. And speaking of those cooling towers, that's one of the major reasons people think that the film is set in California, because they believe they're the cooling towers for the closed Rancho Seco nuclear site outside Sacramento. So apart from the possibility of the cat hunting scene, that's a good indicator that most of the film takes place in California.
It doesn't make any sense.
Doesn't have to make sense. It's fate. It's fate. It's the flower of light in the field of darkness that's giving me the strength to carry on. You understand?
Is that from your book?
No, it's Johnny Cash, live at Folsom Prison.
What?
Ah, Eli's a Greystone Chapel fan apparently.
Do you think anyone lives there?
I don't know.
And now we get to meet Professor George and Martha, played by Michael Gambon and Francis Delatour. And although in the film we later find out that George and Martha are cannibals, I think they're quite an interesting depiction, because they're not that stereotypical depiction of crazy cannibals. If we look at their pitfall trap, it's not smeared with blood, they don't shoot on sight, and they invite people in to listen to their 1979 Anita Ward LP on the hand-crank gramophone and have cups of tea.
We get so few visitors these days. George is suspicious of everybody. I'm Martha. Would you care for some tea?
And as Eli identifies George and Martha as cannibals, I had to look into cannibalism as a form of illness, specifically kuru. Now, I'm not an expert, I'm not going to pretend to be, I did a little bit of internet research, and kuru is an infliction you can get from eating human flesh. More specifically, it's a protein that's found in the human brain and spinal column. And because it's eating the same type of protein as your own species, i.e. human eating human, it doesn't have an option for the immune system to fight off this infection, and that's why it can be so dangerous. Now, that's usually mitigated by eating, say, infected beef like BSE. Because of it being a different species, it has to jump the species barrier, which gives us the opportunity for our immune systems to fight off the infection. Not the same case when it's the same species eating the same species. And Eli is able to identify that Martha has kuru from her shaking hands, and that's one of the initial symptoms, along with muscle aches and headaches. And as the disease progresses, it leads to basically an almost a shutdown of mental functions. People are unable to support their own body weight, unable to lift their heads up, difficulty breathing, difficulty eating, difficulty swallowing, and it's usually a very fatal disease because it leads to cases of pneumonia and infection. So, there's your lesson on Kuru that you get from eating human flesh. Another lesson we can take from George and Martha is they're very proficient at storing firearms. Now, they've got a lot of ammunition and a lot of guns. My own personal headcanon is a lot of these have been taken off the people that are buried in their back garden. However, we've already had a line of dialogue in the film that implies that ammunition is really quite hard to get hold of.
You got a gun. Oh, shit, it ain't loaded. No, they never are.
So I question whether George and Martha are actually reloading their own cartridges. And that's a really important survival skill. If you're able to take a spent ammunition cartridge and actually repurpose it and reuse it as usable ammunition, that's a really good survival skill.
We know you're in there! Come on out and nobody needs to get hurt!
They ain't coming out.
Where on earth did George and Martha get a claymore mine from? We can see when Redridge opens the box that you can see the front towards enemy markings that signify it's a claymore mine. And that makes me question, maybe they didn't take all of their ammunition and weapons off hijackers. Maybe they've had military training themselves, they've got some of their own equipment, or they've raided some kind of military installation or outpost, and that's why they've got military grade gear in their house. Oh yeah, Redridge is in this, played by Ray Stevenson. Now, I've not mentioned him because he doesn't really do a whole lot in the movie apart from be a sounding board for Carnegie and a bit of physical presence and muscle. And that's no criticism on Ray Stevenson's acting ability, it just doesn't give him much to do. And then Carnegie shows us he's got the trump card when it comes to weapons in this post-apocalyptic scenario. He's got a shoulder-fired RPG and a mounted Civil War era Gatling gun. Without exception, that's the highest cyclic rate of any firearm in the Book of Eli. Depending on the operator, that thing can fire between 200 to 500 rounds of ammunition. I wouldn't be surprised if the engineer, Tom Waits' character, spends half his life reloading shells after it's been used. And for our next survival lesson, we can see that Solara uses Eli's bowstring to garrote the driver when she's in Carnegie's convoy to facilitate her escape. Did you forget about this scene from earlier?
Here, take the wire off of that. Spool it up.
And while we're talking about the vehicles, I like how they've been armoured. There's very little glass on them, they're all reinforced with small viewing holes, and it reminds me of another vehicle from a different post-apocalyptic film. So while I appreciate that one of the goons points out the difficulties of acquiring fuel, I've got a question. Where is Carnegie getting this fuel from? Presumably it's 30 years old. The hydrocarbons separate over time and no longer support combustion. Is he going to Gastown? And then to Bullet Town for more bullets for his Gatling gun? And for our final lesson from the Book of Eli, we actually see that the engineer uses lockpicks to open the locked Bible for Carnegie. And that's a really important skill and shows that having the ability to bypass and unlock things without the original key, without having to destroy them or break into them, really useful skill and really useful equipment to have and know how to use. So let's talk about the final twist, that Eli on some level has a visual impairment. I'm not going to say blind because the film doesn't give us enough information to make that assumption. He could be completely blind and not see a thing, or he could be partially sighted. He could see just motions and movement, or vague outlines, we don't know. And obviously throughout the film there are plenty of hints to it if you've already been paying attention. And there's loads of lists and videos of people putting out all the different examples. I'm not going to do it here. So I'll leave it to you to have your own opinion on the level of visual impairment that Eli has throughout the film. And the final question I want to ask you about the film is one that I've worked on as I've been watching this. I've seen the film 4 times in the past week to prepare for this video. And I want to ask the question, with all the Christian themes that are present in the film, does Eli have divine intervention? Now, if you think about it, already discounting the issues of a partially sighted person covering the kind of distance that Eli has done, we've already touched on the difficulties of that. There are other points I want to look at that show that Eli might be protected on his journey. So for my first piece of evidence for does Eli have divine protection is, how did he escape from Carnegie's accommodation? It had a guard outside it all night. We don't see any other entrances or exits, and we even see Carnegie's character run up to the window and shake it, showing it's still secure. How did Eli escape? With the scene where the two rapists are trying to have their way with Solara, we can see that Eli shoots the first one in quite a sensitive area. And the second one, well, he should be able to completely see Eli. He stood in front of him. And the person that he's already shot has already fallen over, so there's no obstruction there. But he still looks over his shoulder, like is he looking for where Eli is? Or is he trying to judge how far he can get to a safe distance? But he should be able to see Eli. He hasn't just willed himself into existence and teleported in front of him. Maybe I'm misinterpreting that glance over his shoulder, but he should be able to see the person that's about to attack him. Another thing I want to point out is when Carnegie shoots Eli, if you pay attention in the background, there's actually a lightning strike. Is that evidence of some higher being really annoyed that one of his messengers has just been mortally injured? And the final thing I want to point out is the injuries that are sustained by Carnegie and Redridge. There's a lot of coincidence in their injuries. You could call it an act of God, perhaps? Carnegie is injured in the leg by either a rebound or shrapnel from the buckshot of one of Eli's shotgun shells. And it's heavily implied he's going to end up dying from the wound going gangrenous, despite already having a scene earlier in the film that shows how aware of disinfection he was. And Redridge, he places Eli's machete on the dashboard of the vehicle, which then flips and ends up impaling him. Now, I don't want to know the chances of what being impaled by a machete is in a flipping vehicle, but it's still a very strong coincidence that he just happens to be injured by, for this theory, Eli's holy weapon. So, I'll leave it to your own personal opinion. Does Eli have divine protection on his journey throughout this film? There we go. That's the survival lessons and survival skills we can learn from the Book of Eli. If you've seen something that I've not mentioned, please consider leaving me a comment below. And while you're there, answer the question, do you think Eli has divine protection throughout the course of the film? And what level of blindness do you think is exhibited by Eli in the film? If you liked the video, please consider liking it on YouTube, let us know I'm doing a good job. If you really liked it and want to see more of my content, consider subscribing to the Survival Mistakes YouTube channel. Don't forget to click that bell icon so you'll know when I do my next upload. If you want to see what I'm up to in between videos, I'm active on all sorts of social media. You can chat to me, see pictures of things I'm working on, chat to other followers. So I'm active on Facebook, we've got a page called Survival Mistakes. I'm active on Twitter as @ZoeSurvival. I'm over on Instagram as Survival Mistakes. And I've also set up a subreddit over on Reddit as What Else? Survival Mistakes. So, other than the outtakes, there's only one way I know how to end the video, and that's for me to say to you, get out there and do the impossible every day. Thank you. Now, it's not very clear in the film, but what he's hanging around his neck is actually a ferro rod. Who decided to interrupt me? My father. My father interrupted my YouTube filming, where I posted a photo of myself, to say, if you're outside, you'll need thermals. It's cold. Thanks, Dad.
We're not going to eat you, are we?
Nope.
I don't think my neighbour would like it if I ate my neighbour's cat. You okay? No.
Do you know any survival skills or survival lessons from the Book of Eli? Guess not.